Good afternoon, everyone. This is the April 20th, 2021 City Finance Committee, and may I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Harmon?
Here.
Councilmember Gutierrez?
Here.
And Committee Chair Friedman?
Present. Thank you. We are all here. So now I'm going to move on to public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak for items not on today's agenda? If you do wish to speak, please raise your hand in the app. And I am looking to see, I don't see anyone, so I will close public comment. And now we'll go down to item 1, which is the 2-year financial plan for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. And including the fiscal year 2022 recommended budget. So I'll turn that over to Mr. DiMartini.
Great, thank you very much, Chair Friedman, committee members. My name is Keith DiMartini, and I'm the city's finance director. And it is my pleasure to present a very high-level overview of the city's fiscal year 2022-2023 recommended budget. And the purpose of today's meeting, you can go to the next slide, please, is just to provide a very, very high-level overview of the budget document, which will be published on the city's website and be made available this afternoon at 2 o'clock at the same time that the city council meeting begins. I'll provide a very high-level overview of the document itself and what will be included in it. We'll also provide a listing of all of the budget review meetings that are scheduled to occur over the next 2 months, both with the Finance Committee and with the City Council. So it's very clear to you and also to the public about when the budget discussions will be occurring. And then the direction that staff would like to get from the Finance Committee this afternoon is to just understand and listen in regards to any additional topics that you would like to be discussed during the budget process. And then staff will do what we can to accommodate all of those requests. So that's the purpose of today's session with the Finance Committee. We go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to first just start with a very brief high-level overview of the budget document itself. Next slide, please. So the city charter actually dictates the process and the timeline for the budget development process and the timeline and schedule for review with the Finance Committee and in particular the City Council. Pursuant to the city charter, the city's budget from the city administrator must be submitted no later than 60 days prior to July 1st, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. And so April 20th is the date this year, which we will be submitting the budget to the City Council and make it available to the public for the public's review and examination. During the months of May and June is when the Council will listen to a number of budget presentations from department staff in regards to revenues and expenditures and projects and capital and staffing, and a number of other components that make up the overall budget, and then also take public comment in regards to the proposed budget. And that budget will take effect on July 1st. Just a reminder that the city does implement a 2-year budget process, a 2-year financial plan. So the budget document that will be before you this cycle represents the first year of the 2-year plan for fiscal year 2022 and 2023. Next slide, please. The budget document itself, the budget book, is a big document. It's a lengthy document with a great deal of information that staff feels and has determined to be relevant and informative for the city council to take and understand and read and ask questions to make the most informed decisions possible with the city's limited resources. The beginning of the document starts with a pretty extensive budget message from the city administrator that outlines some of the major trends and considerations and assumptions that have been built into the recommended budget from the city administrator. It also lists a number of priority projects that the city council has told city staff that should be the priorities in the upcoming fiscal years. There are a number of summary schedules at the beginning of the front of the document, which provide updated information and projections in regards to revenues and expenditures by department, by major fund, a number of schedules in regards to our city staffing levels. And then there are a number of sections where it details each department's operating and capital budgets, and a great deal of information about a number of the priority projects and performance metrics that are used to evaluate the delivery of the services that staff provide. So you can look forward to reading all of that information in the budget book that will be posted online today at 2 o'clock. Again, there's a 2-year plan by department detailing out those revenues and expenditures and performance metrics. Next slide, please. The book itself goes into a great deal of information about the city's general fund, which is the largest fund. It's the most discretionary fund, which is used to fund a number of the services that the city is able to provide to the public. On this slide, it shows all of the departments that are either primarily or completely funded by the city's general fund, ranging from library and the fire department all the way down to city attorney and public works. The book itself and the presentations that will be forthcoming today at the city council meeting, and then also in future finance committee and city council meetings, staff will review in a great amount of detail, revenue considerations, expense pressures. We'll talk about the reserves in the general fund, which there are significant impacts to the city's reserves, as we've been talking about throughout this fiscal year. We'll talk about a number of capital projects for ensuring that the city's infrastructure continues to be maintained and invested in. We'll talk about a number of projects that are allocated funding in the upcoming 2 fiscal years that staff has determined to be a priority based on city council's directions. The city's budget continues to be impacted by COVID. COVID has been a substantial impact, economic impact to the city at large and the greater area. But on the city's budget specifically, we have seen significant impacts on a number of our general fund revenue sources and departmental revenue sources in particular that have substantially changed the way that our budget projections are looking. So we will go into a great deal of detail to explain that to the Finance Committee and the City Council. There are a number of fee changes that are being proposed, most of which are just presented to you for your consideration to ensure that we are achieving cost recovery. Really, it's prudent for us to continue to adjust our fees to ensure that we're recovering our costs. And so the Finance Committee will hear those fee changes as well. As I mentioned earlier, departments will present a number of their priority projects to you as well. And in order to balance the budget this year, this is something that we talked about with the City Council in February during the budget retreat, the budget work session. We talked about expenditure reductions that were required in the fiscal year 2022 recommended budget in order to balance. The proposed budget that is before you does include just a little over $6 million of expenditure reductions, similar to expenditure reductions that were required to balance the current fiscal year budget, so that we can maintain some fiscal stability. And so we will go into some detail about what those reductions are and what some of the service level impacts might be. On the right-hand side, I talked about a number of the major considerations that were included with developing the general fund budget overall, so you can see those here. Sort of in summary, it was another difficult year, another difficult, challenging year in preparing the city's budget. I continue to be incredibly impressed with the staff that have been working on the budget. And staff has done a very thorough and comprehensive job in developing this budget and bringing it before you today. And so we're looking forward to discussing it with you. Next slide, please. The budget book will also go into some detail in regards to the number of enterprise funds that we have. You can see those on the left-hand side, and a number of internal service funds that the city has. Those are the funds that service and support the enterprise and the general fund departments. And similar to the general fund, those departments will present all the considerations and assumptions that were built into their proposed budgets. And you can see all those here in the center. Again, the same impacts on COVID. And there are some new projects and new programs being presented in the proposed budget that staff will present as well. We'll go on to the next slide, please. So now I wanted to go through the detailed budget review calendar with the Finance Committee so that everyone is aware of when we will be engaging with you and delivering presentations and then asking for your sort of review and feedback. Next slide, please. So the budget process in regards to presenting with council and the Finance Committee and starting to listen to the public begins today. Today is the day that the city will issue its proposed budget for fiscal year 22 and 2020 and 23. Today we'll be gathering the Finance Committee's feedback on any additional topics that you wish to hear during this budget cycle. This afternoon during the City Council meeting, staff will be delivering a very high-level overview presentation, primarily of the city's general fund recommended budget, and then we'll be asking the City Council to approve of the budget review schedule, which is this schedule right here. The items denoted in red are the times where staff will be delivering presentations to the Finance Committee specifically. And so you can see on April 27th, that's next Tuesday, staff will be going through the general fund tax and non-departmental revenue projections in the proposed budget. We'll be going through that in quite some detail with you next Tuesday. And then on May 4th, we'll be coming back to the Finance Committee where the general fund departments will be presenting any proposed fee changes to you. Next slide, please. On May 11th, the Finance Committee will meet again, where staff from the enterprise funds will present any proposed fee changes to you during that meeting. Next slide, please. The Finance Committee will meet again on May 18th, and that's where staff will be prepared to recommend any adjustments or changes to the recommended budget based on presentations that we have already had and feedback that we've already received from you. And then the committee will have an opportunity to make some decisions and make some recommendations to the City Council in regards to the recommended budget. And that will be the last time where the Finance Committee is scheduled to meet. And as you can see, the City Council will continue to meet through the middle and end of May. And then in the next slide, please, you'll see that the City Council will receive the Finance Committee's budget recommendations on the meeting scheduled for June 9th in the evening, so that there can be greater public participation during that meeting. And then the City Council is scheduled to formally adopt the recommended budget on June 22nd at the regular City Council meeting. Next slide, please. If you can go back a slide, please, Ms. Nickerson. The recommendations for today's presentation with the Finance Committee is to receive the recommended 2-year financial plan for fiscal years 2022 and 2023, including the recommended operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2023. And that the Finance Committee if you would be able to provide staff with any additional topics that the committee wishes to include in your review, and then staff will be able to take that feedback and see if we can include that in future presentations before you. And before I open it up to questions and discussion, I just want to take an opportunity to thank the dozens and dozens of staff across all the city departments that have worked very, very hard and diligently over the past few months in preparing this budget that is before you today. A great deal of time and effort went into it, a great deal, and another challenging budget cycle. And in particular, I'd like to recognize Brandon Boudet and Chase Evans in the budget team that have spent many, many hours preparing this document that was presented to you today. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge many of the staff that have worked on this document. And that concludes my presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeMartini. And again, it goes without saying, thank you to our staff and everyone who put so much work into this. The budget is a huge undertaking, and also, especially when it's the 2-year budget, it's even greater. So, Mr. DeMartini, if I could have you come on, I have a question, then I'll open up to my colleagues if they have any questions. But I'm just looking at the schedule for the finance, and I just noted it's at 12:30, and on one of them it goes to 1:45. And I know in years past, there's been a lot of discussion. Sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. Would we be able to maybe make it at 12? Do you think, would there be a need to do 12, or do you think 12:30 gives us enough time to get through each of these items? I just don't want to shortchange ourselves, being that we run up against the council meeting with only an hour and 15 minutes.
Councilmember Freeman, thank you for bringing that up. Staff did look at each of the agenda items and the content that is planned to be delivered in each of those presentations. 12:30 might be a little tight on some of them. We think it will work, but we would be happy to have those meetings start at 12 o'clock if it gives the committee adequate time. We would be happy to start at 12 o'clock if you would choose to do so.
Okay, I just don't want to shortchange you presentations or questions. So I'll ask my colleagues if you have questions now, and if you could say if you'd rather prefer 12 or 12:30 as the start time. So I'd like to hear from that and any other questions you might have. Councilmember Gutierrez.
I would also like to start at 12, please.
Thank you. And Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. No questions, but I agree. I think 12 would be great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm not hearing any questions. So Mr. DeMartini, we'll start at 12. It just gives us more so we can really vet these issues. I think given this year, the challenge we're facing, that extra half hour will allow us to have that extra time to really go into the challenging budget we have. So make that change. So I will open it up to public comment on this item. And is there any member of the public who wishes to speak? I don't see any on the list, so I'll close public comment. And now we need to actually approve the recommendation. So is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
So Councilmember Harmon moved the staff recommendation. Is there a second?
I second.
And Councilmember Gutierrez has the second. So can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, for the motion, the recommendation to receive the recommended 2-year financial plan for fiscal years 2022 and 2023, and then also for the committee to provide staff with any additional topics that the committee wishes to include in their review. The motion was given by Councilmember Harmon and then seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. We'll do a roll call. We'll start with Councilmember Harmon, please.
Yes.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yes.
And then Committee Chair Friedman.
Yes. Okay.
Motion passes unanimously.
Great, thank you. And with that, and we'll be starting those meetings at 12, so we'll make that, and we'll go on to the next item, which is item 2 on our agenda, is the proposed Santa Barbara clean energy rates. So I will turn that over to Ms. Parenta, and Parenta, you have the floor.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry, I'm just switching my webcam. Oops, it's not. I apologize. We just went through a different. Well, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to share my webcam today. We're having some computer issues, but I'll walk you through the presentation. So good afternoon. My name is Alelia Parento, and I'm the city's Energy and Climate Division Manager. and today we will be sharing the rate proposition we have for you. Next slide, please. So really quickly, today's agenda is that we're going to give you a quick update on where we are with SBCE implementation. We're going to provide some background on our rate development, including an introduction of our energy products, what we'll be offering to our customers, a quick introduction to our revenue requirement and how that feeds into rate development, and some other cost factors that we want to discuss with you. And lastly, we'll finish on next steps. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, Santa Barbara Clean Energy has met a number of milestones as we work towards implementing our effort. We are here where this orange arrow is pointing to at the rate setting milestone. And as you can see, there are not too many milestones to go beyond this. So once we set our rates, we're actually developing our notices to customers and letting them know this is coming, and soon enough we'll be launching. Next slide, please. We're going to be launching residential service in October of 2021, and then commercial, industrial, municipal service, basically all of the other rate classes, in March of 2022. Next slide, please. So what are we basing SBCE rates on? Next slide. In terms of rate development, there are a number of considerations that we factor in as we're looking to develop our rates. Next slide. First is revenue sufficiency. We want to make sure that our rates are going to fully cover all program expenses, debt service, and reserves as we build them out. Next, we want to make sure that we're competitive with the incumbent utilities and we're able to offer market pricing that is attractive to our customers and will retain them. Next, rate stability. Rate changes should be minimized. And as you may have noticed in the past few years, rates change substantially throughout the year for a lot of the incumbent utilities, and we want to minimize that. Next, we want to make sure that the customer understands that the rates, they should be simple and transparent and easily understood by customers. Rates should be equitable among customers, and they should be justified by how the customer uses the electricity and what that cost of service is. And lastly, all energy rates are required to encourage conservation and efficient use of electricity. So all of these considerations go into designing our programs and the actual CCE product delivery overall. Next slide, please. So in general, these are some basic principles that we've adopted as we've looked to develop the rates, and that is that there should be no general fund subsidy, that this is an enterprise fund and should be contained within itself, that these rates will be reevaluated and adopted as needed to meet the needs of the programs. And this is very important for today's presentation. These rates are pegged to Southern California Edison's rates, which are approved by the California Public Utilities Commission. This is a standard practice across community choice energy entities, and I'll explain how they're pegged throughout this presentation. Lastly, SBCE rates should provide the revenue required to operate and administer SBCE and its programs, and that is what is called the revenue requirement, which we'll go into in a moment. Next slide, please. So SBCE's energy products. Next slide. We will be offering 3 different energy products, and these are basically program tracks the customers can fit into depending on their needs. And so we have our default product, which is the 100% green product. We have the opt-down product, which is called our Green Start product. And then we have your build your own product, which is the SBCE Resilient. Next slide, please. SBCE 100% green product, as I mentioned, is the default product, meaning everyone will be defaulted or auto-enrolled into this product when the program launches. This product is 100% carbon-free energy from non-greenhouse gas generating sources. And it does come at a slight rate premium over Southern California Edison's base rate, what someone might be paying today. And that's related to the substantially greener content, what's called exit fees that we'll talk about it in a little bit, and legacy Southern California Edison contracts. Next slide, please. The customer does have the option to opt down, and that is for the more cost-conscious customer, someone who doesn't want to be paying more for the greener content. They can opt down to SBCE's Green Start program, which is the same cost as the current Southern California Edison rates. And so the bill will not change. And it offers higher carbon-free content than Southern California Edison, but lower than our default product. So not that 100% carbon-free content of the SBCE 100% green. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we have our SBCE Resilient product, which again is for folks that are wanting to install solar or battery storage at their facility. This is called a net metering program, similar to the incumbent utilities have today. And what it does is it provides compensation for excess generation. So through the net surplus compensation rate, anything that a solar array generates beyond what is used on site is then paid for from the utility. So we, the CCE, would pay for that excess generation. The benefit of this is that it encourages local investment in renewables and really moves us towards both our renewable energy goals and our carbon neutrality goal. Next slide, please. All right, so circling back to the revenue requirement. Now that we understand what we're providing, how do we get to the rates? Next slide, please. Well, the revenue requirement accounts for 4 different types of costs. One is by far the largest, and that's power supply costs. And those costs are based on the contracts that we enter into based on council's approved product offerings. So the 100% carbon-free content, the lower opt-down content, and then the resilient content. In addition to power supply costs, the revenue requirement considers administrative and operational costs, and this includes contracting costs with our power brokers, marketing costs, regulatory costs that we have each year, et cetera. Then we have our rate stability reserve requirement, which is 25% of revenues, and that's in line with other city reserve policies. And lastly, customer programs that will be offered by SBCE that support council's energy and climate goals. And I'll go into those in the next slide. Next slide, please. SBCE customer programs will be things that will come out of SBCE's offerings and will be able to support council's goals. So there'll be things like energy efficiency and renewable energy project offerings, the actual development of those projects, or financial incentives to help the community develop those projects. It will be things like vehicle and building electrification in support of council's carbon neutrality goal, and then covering some of the energy and climate programs overhead as we work together to develop these programs and then administer them. Next slide, please. So this graph just shows a visual of how all of these pieces work together. So the operational expense, the reserve contribution, and the program costs come together to create our revenue requirement. And then this black line shows how revenue needs to hit all of those cost centers. And so we back down from that the rate that we need based on our estimates of how much power we're going to be selling. Next slides, please. So based on that, these are the formulas that we're planning to base our rates on. The starting point, as I mentioned in the beginning, is pegging our rates to SCE's current rates. And then for the default product, SBCE 100% green, it's their rate plus a 1.2 cent per kilowatt adder. So that is that premium that covers those increased costs. For SBCE Green Start, it is exactly the same as SCE. And so as SCE's rates change, the Green Start rates will change too, but in line. And then SBCE Resilient takes the Green Start rate and then pays for excess the 6.63 cents per kilowatt hour for all of the excess generation. And that's quite a bit more generous than it is currently paid by Southern California Edison. So again, it really helps with our goals. Next slide, please. So I did attach to the staff report a sample SBCE rate schedule, and it's very cumbersome, as you might have seen. It's quite a number of pages, and it was just to show you an example of how these rates are applied to all of the different rate classes. So ultimately, there will be many, many rates, and they all differ based on how the customer uses power. And really, it's quite simple when you apply just those rate formulas. If you look at the Green Start column, as I show it here, that is the same rate that Southern California Edison charges for the same rate in their tariff book. And then the Green 100 just adds that 1.2 cent per kilowatt premium. Next slide, please. So this chart just shows you how it breaks down across the different customer types. And I apologize, there's a lot of numbers on this chart. But really, it's an important chart because it shows you the piece that we have the most control over, which is the generation piece, and the cost comparison of those between Santa Barbara Clean Energy and SCE's bundled service. Our costs actually come in lower, and I'll show that in a different slide as well. And then the piece that really that generates some of that premium is these surcharges. And the surcharges are related to the power cost and difference adjustment that I'll explain again in a minute. But it creates a tipping point where our rates are slightly higher. The benefit or an important note about the PCIA is that it does diminish over time as contracts sunset, and I'll explain that in a second. So overall, as you can see from the very right of this chart, we're still looking at anywhere from 4 to about 9% increases, like we had mentioned a few years back when we were first looking at this effort, and so we're looking like we're in good shape there. Next slide, please. I did want to go into a little bit more depth about the PCIA, or also called exit fees or departing load charges, because this is a really big factor in a lot of our pricing. And so what the PCIA is it takes into account the fact that Southern California Edison entered into long-term contracts on behalf of our territory. So whether they did it last year or 10 years ago, they've entered into a number of multi-decade contracts on our behalf to secure power at lower costs. Well, when we leave to go to CCE, we're sort of stranding them with those contracts. And so the agreement was made to keep the utilities whole so that cost would not get transferred to other customers that remain with the Southern California Edison. And so that came up with the PCIA. Now, as you can see in the graphic, once you leave Southern California Edison service to become a CCE, you no longer get bundled up into their long-term contracts, but you pay until the existing contracts sunset. So for the next couple of years, or maybe up to the next decade, we'll see that ratchet down as contracts fall off. So the PCIA does create a cost center for us today, but it is a diminishing cost center over time. Next slide, please. This graph really shows you the impact of the PCIA on our costs. So as I mentioned before, our generation costs are generally lower than Southern California's base rate generation costs, but it's that PCIA surcharge that creates the need for a premium. The benefit is as that PCIA diminishes, so does our need for a premium. And so it's really only at these outset years that we need to look at that. And then we have a lot more flexibility with how we develop our rates down the line. Next slide, please. Another thing I just wanted to point out is that even SBC's 100 program is slightly more, although essentially cost neutral to SCE's green rate. But to ignore the fact that there's a massive opportunity cost by moving towards a CCE would be a huge mistake. Because what happens is as that PCIA diminishes, our rates will get lower than Southern California Edison's as well. Plus, by moving to CCE, we have significant rate control and the ability at your council level to offer rate relief as we see that necessary. We can take program revenues and invest that locally into incentives and projects and resources where we can't today. That all goes to Edison for them to reallocate. And then even by adding solar or batteries, we can enhance our customers' revenue potential through that net metering or SBCE resilient program. And so there is substantial benefits to our community to move in this direction. Next slide, please. Oh, pardon me, can you go back one more slide? I did want to correct in the staff report. Thank you, Councilmember Friedman, for catching this. There was one small error under the SBCE Green Start, the first of the two green columns. The bottom row, the industrial number, was incorrect in the staff report. It showed the $33,000 number, but it should have been the same as SCE's base, this $30,000 number. So I just wanted to point that out. Next slide, please. And then a big reminder that CCE is all about options. So the default is the 100% carbon-free product. You can opt down, you can opt out. And that is a big benefit over what we have today, where you only have one choice for your electrical provider. So that is a big thing. I just like to wrap that rate discussion up to make sure that everyone remembers that. Next slide, please. So there were a few cost factors that have shifted a little bit since last time we came to full council to make some CCE decisions, and I wanted to run through those really quickly. Next slide, please. First, you may have noticed for 100% green, I said it was 100% carbon-free, not renewable. And so your council had made the decision to default at a 100% renewable product. And because of some market changes and wanting to be a little bit more conservative just at launch until we can build some healthy reserves and manage against some rate volatility, we are suggesting that we blend in some carbon-free content at the outset, just for the first few years to mitigate the rate premium and to achieve reserves and program funding sooner. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? The only difference that we're talking about is adding some large hydro into our portfolio. Large hydro is not technically considered renewable by the state of California due to its impact on some ecosystems, but it is 100% carbon free. There is no carbon emitted by its generation. And so it is a good potential for us to loop in some carbon free content, create some safety net at our initial economic position, and then bring in all of the renewables within the next couple of years. Next slide, please. Just to show you visually what the impact of mixing even a little bit of carbon-free content into our portfolio ends up with is the red arrow shows us meeting target reserves at the 100% renewable content. We meet it sort of midway through FY27. If we blend in just 25% carbon-free electricity, we meet it a whole year sooner. And if we go up to 50% carbon-free, we meet it 2 years sooner, with the ability to ratchet that down as we go. Next slide, please. And then in terms of meeting our goals, or actually not quite there yet, but mixing in the carbon-free content does provide some rate stability and economic security, as I pointed out in the beginning. We can hopefully get to that programming sooner, which was a big priority when we started this project. We have the greater ability to invest locally because of those funds. And then it gives us a lot more flexibility in future rates because there's more wiggle room against the SCE rates. Next slide, please. And the impact on our goals. Well, in terms of our renewable electricity goal, we're still very much on target because that goal was established for 2030 and we will meet it well before then. In terms of our carbon neutrality goal, not only are we still on target, but this opens up significant pathways as it gets us to program funding sooner, which is a big step in getting community adoption of technologies that we're going to need people to take on if we try to meet our carbon neutrality goal. And it gives us some funding pathways for that. And then in terms of our current ability to offer programs, I just wanted to point out we're already having success leveraging the programs that we're creating in the Energy and Climate Division and being able to offer those through the SBCE. Additionally, our partners at CalChoice are doing a lot in terms of piloting various programs, and they're allowing us for access to those programs. And so without any capital investment, we're able to offer really innovative programs to our community out of the gates. Apparently, we'll be the first CCE to be able to do that, and so that's very exciting. Next slide, please. The one other policy decision that I wanted to bring up is that originally we had asked you to consider defaulting the CARE customers, which are the income qualified customers, in at the 100% carbon-free default, but at their same rate that they pay today through Southern California Edison. We've looked into that a little bit further, and there is some potential legal uncertainty given that it would require a subsidy, that the higher rates would have to subsidize the CARE rates. And so given that, we've sort of taken a step back from that policy decision, and we're looking at defaulting them in the Green Start, or the lower carbon-free content product, which would require no subsidy. And ultimately, the thing to remember there is that it's the same electrons being delivered, but we have the ability to retain, the ability to provide affordable electricity to them at a discounted rate, which might be a little bit more challenging if we default them to the premium product. Now, that being said, they can always upgrade to the premium product if that's important to them. And so that's always an option, but they would have to pay the premium for that. In the rate sheet, you'll see, if you took a look at it, all of the CARE and FARA rates, they just show up as the Green Start rate currently, because then we can offer that discounted rate to them. Next slide, please. So next steps, we will be hopefully heading to full council May 11th. And, next slide. and have the public hearing there with a recommendation from your committee. And then we'll be issuing public notices. This is a California public utility requirement in August and September, which give our local customers all of the information they need to know about the program, what the rates are, how to opt down or out, and where to go with questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be launching residential in October, which is very exciting. And we'll be doing a huge outreach push around that. So more to come on that. Next slide, please. So our recommendation today is that you receive a presentation on our rates and provide input as you see fit. And then please recommend a public hearing date for May 11th at 2 p.m. for council's consideration of these rates.
Thank you, Ms. Parenta, for the great presentation and all the work you've done on it. Oh, your camera's working now, great.
Well, now I'm on my laptop, so I'm looking in a funny direction, but there we go.
Great presentation. This is a very exciting program and a lot of major issues that we've dealt with at the committee, at our subcommittee on it. So we'll talk it to when we make comments. So at this point, I will open it up for any questions from my colleagues. If you have questions, please turn on your camera. All right, seeing no lights turned on or cameras turned on, I will see if there's any public comment. Mr. DiMartini, do you see anyone with their hands raised from the public who wishes to speak to this item?
So Chair Friedman, I am monitoring the attendees in public comment. I'm not seeing any hand raised at this time.
Great, with no hands raised, I will close public comment and now turn it over to comments. I'll just start off. I just want to thank you, Ms. Parenta, and all of our staff that have put this together. It's very exciting. It's been many years in the making. The conversations for having our own local community choice energy system has gone back over a decade, actually back into the mid 2000s, and to finally have it here later this year is great. And just the due diligence that we've done and the ability to implement our own programs. And at the CC subcommittee, we discussed these issues, in particular, the difference between renewable and carbon free, and the need to really get our reserves situated to protect in case there is any volatility, but also the ability to have our programming come in a year or two sooner. It just makes, that's why we wanted to do local, to invest in our own local programming. So I just wanted to really thank you and all of our staff that have put this together. And I'm so happy to see this coming forward. And Ms. Harmon, I see your camera is on. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I was just going to say the exact same thing. I'm really so excited about this, so grateful for your work, Ms. Parento. And I have to say this presentation was awesome. This is an area in which I don't have very much expertise, so I really appreciated how clearly you put the sort of choices and considerations. And so thank you very much. And so much work, like Mr. Friedman has said, has gone into this. And it's just thrilling, really, to be at this moment. And I'm so grateful to be a part of it with all of you. And thanks, Mr. Friedman, to your work on the subcommittee as well. I know I've heard through the grapevine that you all have had very substantive discussion about these issues, and it gives me a lot of confidence that we've had really, really thorough vetting of these important issues as we're moving forward. So with that, really just, again, super, super grateful and thrilled about this and excited about a clean future. And with that, I would like to move that we recommend a public hearing date for May 11 as per staff recommendations. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Harmon. The motion's been made. Councilmember Gutierrez, comments, and would you like to second the motion?
I would like to second the motion and thank the city staff for all their hard work. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The motion's been made, seconded, and I just want to point out on the screen right now, one of the highlights of the whole work was the logo that you see on your screen there with the light bulb and our coastline. It's just a really innovative and great logo. So with that, the motion's been made and seconded, and may I get a roll call, please?
Yes, the recommendation before the Finance Committee is to receive a presentation on the proposed Santa Barbara Clean Energy customer rates effective October 2021, and recommend a public hearing date of May 11th, 2021 at 2 p.m. for Council's consideration of the Santa Barbara Clean Energy rates. We'll take a roll call. Committee Member Gutierrez?
Yes.
Committee Member Harmon?
Yes.
And Committee Chair Friedman?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you for all your work on that. And that item is now closed. And Mr. DeMartini, do we have anything else? Doesn't look like there's anything on the agenda, any announcements?
Yes, Chair Friedman, if I may, there's a minor clarification that is required of the committee on the recommendation that you approved on the budget item that I presented earlier. If I may read the recommendation one more time and then ask the committee to do a roll call vote again, I would really appreciate it. Is that okay?
Sure, that works.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to read the recommendation so that it's clear for the record. The recommendation on the budget item, which was the first agenda item today, was to receive the recommended 2-year financial plan for fiscal years 2022 and 2023, including the recommended operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2022. There was a typo in the presentation that said fiscal year 2023. This is the budget for fiscal year 2022. And then also to provide staff with any additional topics the committee wishes to include in their review. So if I can ask the committee to maybe for the motion to be made and then seconded, and then we'll take a roll call, please.
Okay, is there a new motion, Councilmember Gutierrez?
I will make the motion to make the corrections.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Harmon. And can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you very much. Committee Member Gutierrez.
Yes.
Committee Member Harmon.
Yes.
And Committee Chair Friedman.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you all very much. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.